My name is Luna Alden. At my own family reunion, I was handed a folding chair and told to sit by the wall, wedged between the drink station and the kitchen doors, close enough to hear the laughter, but not close enough to belong. No name card, no welcome, not even eye contact. Meanwhile, they toasted to legacy, to success, to those who built the foundation we all stand on. They didn't know the jet circling above wasn't delivering a guest. It was landing for me. They didn't know the foundation they praised was drafted in my handwriting, sleepless nights and red-marked sketches erased from the company record. They didn't know that their little show of polished betrayal was about to unravel. But I did. And I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to reclaim one. They called me the one who never made it. Tonight, they would remember my name, not because I shouted it, but because it would be engraved on the steel outside, right under the logo of the jet I built. And this time, no one would look away. The Mountain Glen estate hadn't changed. Same carved oak doors, same wine-colored carpet that muffled every footstep like a secret. But something about returning after 4 years made each sound louder in my mind, each click of my heels, each breath behind my teeth. I handed my keys to the valet without a glance. He took them like I was no one. Inside, warm chandeliers pooled gold over the banquet hall, where name cards sparkled at every seat. Except mine. "Luna Alden?" a young staffer asked, checking her clipboard with a flicker of confusion. "No tag for you, but you can sit right there." She pointed to the corner. Folding chair, aluminum legs, no cushion. It faced the drink station, and the kitchen door behind me swung open every 40 seconds like clockwork. That was my rhythm now. I walked past the head table. Silverware gleamed, crystal clinked. No one stood. Not my mother, not my sister Velena, not even my father, who once told me I was too delicate for the industry he built. Velena turned, cranberry lipstick perfect, voice glazed in champagne. "We weren't sure you'd show. Or where to seat you." I smiled, small and sharp. "Looks like you figured it out." I sat without ceremony. My seat didn't have a name, but baby Everett had his own balloon. Appetizers passed. My plate stayed untouched. A waiter glanced my way, then moved on. I asked for water. He blinked like I wasn't part of the guest count. I let it go. I always did. That was the thing they never noticed. I didn't fight for attention. I watched. I waited. Then came the toasts. Velena rose first. "To legacy," she said, raising her glass. "To the pillars of this family. To our parents, my sister Seraphine and Uncle Roy, whose vision still guides us." A pause. Not a glance in my direction, but a space just long enough to mark an absence. I folded my napkin into a crane beneath the table, same as I did when I was 12 and no one listened. Something to do with my hands when my voice wasn't welcome. They could erase me from the guest list, the slideshow, the speeches, but not from the foundation beneath their feet, not for much longer. The last time I stood in a boardroom with the Alden name etched in glass, I still believed it meant something. I was 33, lead designer of the Hearthstone Renewal Project, an initiative to restore affordable housing in post-industrial corridors. It had started as sketches on my apartment wall, moved into midnight models on my laptop, then blueprints reviewed in silence at our family firm's headquarters. When I pitched it, they clapped. Quiet, polite, performative. Within 2 months, the project was greenlit. Within 3, my name was gone from the documentation. Velena presented the project to the press, her voice honey-smooth, a family-led vision for inclusive development. She smiled in the photos. I wasn't in the room. I asked once, just once, why the press packet had her face instead of mine. My mother looked up from her espresso and said, "Velena photographs better. You care about the work, don't you?" I swallowed it, like I always did. But that wasn't the worst of it. After the project gained traction, something shifted. My login credentials stopped working. My calendar access disappeared. Emails to the family office bounced back. Garrett, Velena's husband and the firm's quiet fixer, told me it was a software update. "We're consolidating logins," he said too quickly. I brought it up to my father. He didn't even fold the newspaper. "You should be grateful," he murmured. "We gave you a place at the table." Except they hadn't. They gave me a corner and called it opportunity. They took my plans, put another name on them, and rewrote the history while I was still in the room, so I walked away. No rage, no threats, just silence. But I didn't leave empty-handed. Belle, my former assistant, had seen it coming. She was the one who quietly forwarded documents when she noticed edits made in my absence. She whispered things like, "You may want to keep a copy of this," and "Don't delete your drafts." When she was suddenly dismissed for accessing protected files, I knew exactly what that meant. I left the company 2 weeks later. But I kept every file, every signature page, every version history. I stored it all in encrypted drives and physical backups, labeled and time-stamped. At first, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed to protect the truth. Years passed. I launched my own initiative under my mother's maiden name, the Varela Foundation. It started small, housing equity pilots in 2 cities, funded by grants and silent partners. Then 3 cities, then 5. No press, no ribbon cuttings, just results. And still, my family never asked where I'd gone. Not one call, not even a passive-aggressive holiday card. They believed they'd buried me in enough silence that I'd never rise again. They forgot something crucial. Silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And I had been planning my return from the moment they struck my name off that register. Tonight was just the opening move. It started as a hum, low, distant, almost imperceptible under the clinking of glasses and artificial laughter. But I heard it before anyone else did. I always did. The drone grew louder, steadier, pulsing through the banquet hall like a slow heartbeat no one could explain. Forks paused midair, heads tilted. A child near the head table pointed at the window. "Look, a plane!" Velena rolled her eyes, clearly irritated by the distraction. "Probably someone flying in for the Wellingtons' wedding," she muttered just loud enough. "Or some CEO who thinks bringing groceries from Napa is a personality." But the noise didn't fade. It deepened. Steady, sure, like something that knew exactly where it belonged. I stood slowly, without drama. No one called my name. No one asked why I was moving. But the shift in the room was immediate. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows behind the head table, my heels making the only deliberate sound on the carpet. Outside, beyond the sculpted hedges and the manicured lawn that dipped into the valley, a sleek black jet was taxiing to a stop. The setting sun caught its polished surface like a blade. And then they saw it. Near the tail, beneath a subtle crest shaped like a flame woven into a vine, 5 letters shimmered in silver foil, L. Alden. Silence fell. Not the kind that asks a question, but the kind that answers it. Someone behind me whispered, "That's not a rental." A cousin with too many opinions and too little discretion, probably Colin, added, "That's custom registered. Private foundation craft. That's hers." Chairs shifted. Stemware trembled. Garrett leaned into Velena. His voice wasn't meant to carry, but it did. "I thought she didn't have access. You said it was handled." Velena's jaw clenched. Her spoon hovered in the air, frozen mid-bite of creme brulee. I said nothing, didn't wave, didn't gesture, just stood at the window, still as the truth. They had spent years crafting a version of me that disappeared quietly. That let go. That moved on. But I hadn't moved on. I had moved forward. The Varela Foundation, quietly incorporated, quietly funded, quietly expansive, had been mine from the beginning. And now it had a fleet. And now, the fleet had arrived. I turned back toward the room. Eyes followed, some confused, some wide with the slow dawning horror that comes when a buried name surfaces from the ground they built their legacy on. I walked, unhurried, past rows of chairs where people once looked through me. Now they parted. My father's hand moved to his chest, not from alarm, but from calculation. He was doing the math, trying to place the variables. He wouldn't like the answer. Velena stood as I passed. "What kind of stunt is this?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't look at her. "It's not a stunt," I said. "It's just the ride I came in." And I returned to my seat. Same folding chair, same metal legs. Only now every pair of eyes had followed me to it. Funny thing about erasing someone. Sometimes they come back in ink too bold to fade. I hadn't planned on making a statement that night. The jet was supposed to land an hour after the event ended. But someone had changed the schedule. As I sat quietly, still beside the swinging kitchen doors, still on a chair that could barely hold memory, let alone pride, a woman in a black service uniform approached, older than the rest, calm in a way that didn't require explanation. "Miss Alden," she said softly, offering me a small gray box. "This was left for you earlier. We were instructed to deliver it after dessert. No ribbon, no embellishment, just clean matte wrapping and a cream envelope with 2 words in familiar script. Look inside." I opened the envelope first. Inside was a list, names annotated with notes and symbols. Some were circled, others underlined in red ink. Next to each were remarks like, "Loyal to her. Will pivot if exposed. Let them speak. Trapdoor ready." At the bottom, in sharp feminine handwriting, "They never saw you coming. Neither will they survive what's next." I recognized the handwriting immediately. Belle. She hadn't just disappeared from the firm years ago. She had been removed, fired for overstepping, for accessing documents beyond her role. Velena had smirked when telling me. She was poking around in things she didn't understand. But Belle had understood. And she had been waiting, watching, holding the truth until I was ready. I opened the box. Inside, cushioned in dark velvet, were 3 items. The first, a burned copy of the original investment ledger, my signature still visible, right beside the redacted revisions that removed me. The second, a laminated seating chart from tonight, my name completely absent, every spot carefully labeled except the space beside the service station. Not a mistake. A message. The third, a folded internal memo with a red sticky note stapled to the corner. In bold type, it read, "Reallocate her shares quietly by Q3. No context, no apology, just erasure, formatted and sanctioned. But the moment that made me go still wasn't anger. It was memory. I had seen that memo before, years ago, when it looked different, when my name was still included in the distribution. I had assumed then that I still had a place. I hadn't realized they had already started carving me out, clean and deliberate, as if removing a bruise from a fruit. My thumb ran over the crease in the paper. On the back was a note in ink darker than the print. "In case you still need proof. They buried this. Thought you should know. No signature. None needed. Belle had sent me a mirror, not of what I lost, but of what they tried to hide." And I remembered. I remembered how the quarterly reports began shrinking, how I was left off the email threads, how Garrett claimed it was consolidation, how no one told me my voting access was revoked, and worst of all, how I almost believed it was just me, that I had overreacted, that silence was maturity. But I hadn't been paranoid. I had been patient. I slid everything back into the box, shut the lid, and rested it gently on my lap. Behind me, the banquet room resumed its script. Polite laughter, toasts. The music shifted to something upbeat. But the rhythm didn't reach me. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about documentation. And now, I had it. I reached into my clutch and unlocked the encrypted folder I'd kept for years. Backups, voice memos, contracts, financial logs. My finger hovered above the Select All button. Click. Then, upload. A progress bar inched forward, steady and irreversible. The files were set to go live in 19 minutes. By the time they cleared dessert, the truth would no longer be mine alone. They didn't notice at first. The jet, the box, the upload. It all happened too quietly for a family trained to only recognize disruption when it arrived with fanfare. But silence has its own gravity. It pulls. By the time I walked back toward the main table, conversations were scattered, some stiff with confusion, others stretching into nervous speculation. Someone had finally checked the aircraft registry. The whispers had begun. I didn't hurry. Every step I took was deliberate, measured like an old melody. When I reached the head table, Velena was mid-sentence, something rehearsed about unity, about how legacy is never built alone. I waited until the applause began, then stepped forward and laid the folder flat on the white linen. "This," I said, tapping the edge, contains every contract with my name on it, every proposal authored by me, every drawing, memo, and prototype they later stamped with someone else's initials. Forks paused. Chairs shifted. Someone near the center gasped. I didn't need volume. The words carried on their own. I figured since I keep disappearing from your narratives, it was time I showed you exactly who built the foundation you're standing on. My father said nothing. Garrett's lips parted, then closed again. Valina blinked, then forced a laugh. This is performance art, Luna, always the dramatist. But the tremor in her wineglass betrayed her. Before I could respond, another voice cut in. I wouldn't dismiss it so quickly. Callan stood from the far end. Calm, steady, quiet until now. I submitted Luna's name this morning to the National Housing Innovation Board. She'll be delivering the keynote in 3 weeks, he said. A beat. As founder of the Varela Foundation, recognized now for 5 major redevelopment zones. Valina went pale. Garrett stiffened beside her. I didn't smile. Truth doesn't require decoration. As I turned toward the exit, Valina's voice followed. You always want to be the victim. You built those walls yourself. I paused. No, I said, voice flat. I built the walls because the house kept catching fire, and no one ever asked who lit the match. Her lips curled. If you take this public, I'll make sure no one in this industry trusts you again. I stepped close. You should be careful who owns the land your brand is built on. And I walked away. The older board members didn't look at me with judgment. They looked with reconsideration, not because I demanded their attention, but because they finally realized I had stopped asking for it. The rooftop lounge was too polished to feel honest. Low leather chairs, untouched tumblers of bourbon, and panoramic glass framing a city that had no idea what just unraveled beneath it. They were waiting. My mother sat in the center, like she still presided over something sacred. Valina leaned against the bar, arms folded like a sculpture designed to intimidate. Seraphine, my older sister, stood by the window, quiet, unreadable. They didn't invite me to speak, just left a folder on the table. Neat, prepared. I sat, I opened it. Blueprints, notes in my own handwriting, margins filled with calculations, red arrows, energy efficiency annotations I'd scribbled at 3 a.m. during the Hearthstone build-out. At the top, Seraphine's name. Bold font. Corporate letterhead. She had presented it 3 months ago as her breakthrough in sustainable design. My jaw didn't clench. My hands didn't shake. But something inside me folded very precisely. She delivered it better, my mother said flatly, as if performance justified theft. We only polished the message, Valina added, tilting her head. You always made things too personal. No one funds a manifesto. I looked at Seraphine. She met my eyes, calm. You had ideas, she said, but we made them marketable. You should be proud. Proud, I repeated. The word tasted like dust. You didn't just erase me. You installed yourselves where I stood. No one replied. The silence was no longer heavy. It was hollow. I reached into my purse and removed a single sheet. I unfolded it slowly. No drama, just fact. A non-disclosure agreement, dated 5 years ago, signed by the board, guaranteeing protection of intellectual property submitted under the Varela Strategic Housing Initiative. My name, their signatures, their seal. I built the foundation, I said, voice even. I still own the land. It landed like glass cracking. My mother looked away. Seraphine stepped back. But Valina didn't blink. If you burn this down, my mother said, you burn the family with it. I looked at her. Not with hate, with clarity. The kind that only comes when you've survived long enough to no longer fear consequence. Then maybe it's time something new rises from the ashes. I stood. No one followed. No one reached out. They had finally understood what I had become. Not a rebel, not a rival. An architect with nothing left to lose. Weeks passed. The media flared, then flickered out. Valina was suspended. Seraphine's name disappeared from bios. My father said nothing. My mother stayed silent. I signed the acquisition papers alone. Quiet, final, clean. Then I left for Napa. The mornings were cool, the vineyards beginning to gold. I walked the trail each day with a napkin in my pocket, the same one I'd folded into a crane beside their laughter. One afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a note. Aurora, Velena's daughter. I know what they did. I'm sorry. Thank you for showing me I can be more. I folded the napkin into a leaf, something that doesn't fly away, but stays rooted.